Welcome, everyone. We are here at World Builders, not at World Builders Weekly for a change. We are actually instead doing a special event with our friends from Galactic Journey Press. We have Lorelei Marcus, who I also... Hey, after I asked you what title you wanted to use, guess what I forgot to do? I did not change it to artist. I left it at illustrator. However, I'm pretty sure it can magically change. There, now it suddenly says artist. Welcome to the show. And our friend Gideon, author and editor, also at Galactic Journey, and time travelers. They're both... do I characterize you both as time travelers?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good bet.
I mean... and then, of course, I'm Gray. I'm the executive director of World Builders. But we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about their work. So you all are, first of all, is it okay if I reveal your secret connection?
To who? To each other?
To each other, yes.
Yes.
Yes. So you are related, and I have to say, I mean, there are child labor laws, Gideon, about making your. I know this because I have 4 daughters, and I have tried to make them work with me, and they're. You both work together. Gideon just left. I guess he got scared of the child labor laws. Okay. So you both work together. I'm holding up the wrong book, to write this book.
Yes.
Kitra. Is it Kitra or Qitra?
Qitra.
Kitra. So Kitra. I mean, I'm frankly envious because my daughters and I are all geeks, and the thought of collaborating with them on a work like this would seem wonderful. And I guess I'd like to know, how did that start? What came up? Was it the book first, or was Lorelei drawing things, or?
So Lorelei has been drawing since she was 6, and she's been drawing at a professional level for several years now. Qitra is a young adult book, and I wrote it specifically with Lorelei in mind. I wanted a book that was for all ages, that everyone could appreciate, but particularly would be accessible to someone like her. Because what's the point of writing a book if my family can't enjoy it? And the thing is, I come steeped from a background, and I come by this honestly, obviously. I grew up on the Oz books. I grew up on Edgar Rice Burroughs, all these old classic books. And in the mid-20th century, science fiction magazines all had these great illustrations in them. And I determined that one thing that was missing from modern YA and books in general was illustrations. So I said, hey, Lorelei, would you like to illustrate my book? And of course, being my daughter and enthusiastic about everything, said, how much will you pay me? So I can't divulge our breakdown. I will say that I've had to put off several important expenditures for the family, but that's okay. It's important that Lorelei get adequately compensated.
Absolutely. And is that the way you remember it too, Lorelei?
Maybe there's some slight differences. He did write the book first, and then decided that he was basing it off of juveniles, like in the 60s, and all the science fiction magazines he was reading with these amazing pen illustrations by like Kelly Frias. And he wanted to capture that and sort of revive this lost art of having pictures in books. And I was happy to help and make that happen. And I was very honored that he asked me to do it. I will say it's actually quite convenient when you have somebody who lives in the same house to discuss like the logistics of the art with. And so that helps. But it's definitely a really cool experience getting to work on the book and going through and doing illustrations for it.
Did you get to pick out which sections were going to be illustrated, or did he come to you and say, I want this one and this one and this one, please?
So he came to me with a list printed out of page numbers. I also actually helped edit the book, so I would read through and tell him, well, this part's terrible, and this part's great, and we need to change this.
It's amazing how many times she said that, too.
I mean, it hopefully got less as the time went on.
Yeah, eventually, the book's in print now, but we can still change the text. So,
so he came to me with like a list as I was reading through it, and said like, here's a bunch of I'd say like 20 or so lines that we could possibly do illustrations for, and eventually we narrowed it down to 5 key scenes that we felt were pivotal moments in the novel that I had time to illustrate. We're hoping to do more illustrations in the next book, now that I have a little more experience and can do them faster. But yeah, at the time I was pretty busy, so I only ended up doing 5, but I would like to try and do more in the future.
That makes a lot of sense. With other artists or with your dad again? You don't have to answer that question.
Well, I think I'm definitely going to keep doing the Qitra saga, and I'm just excited to be able to be part of the project because I think it's a really cool book series in general. But I haven't actually considered much what going into as a public illustrator and being professionally hired by other authors. I think I would be like, it sounds exciting. I'm just keeping my options open right now with I'm going into college soon and seeing what I can do. But if somebody wanted to come forward and be like, here's a commission rate to do a novel, I think I would probably say yes if I have the time for it.
The question came up in chat. How old were you when you did these illustrations?
15, I think.
Gotcha.
I'm 16 now, so it was sometime last year, so I must have been around 15.
Gotcha. Now I'm going to pull up on the screen one of the illustrations that so I think earlier in the book it was it's one of the rocket going into the planet. I don't know if you can see the Twitch stream channel. And when you mentioned the old YAs, the classic YAs, and this one just to me totally brings it back to that. It's got the classic kind of rocket ship, and the giant planet. Did you have any? I think you mentioned one artist already, but did you have any influences when you were starting to put these together that you drew from the classic age?
Well, I'll be honest. I actually have been doing more research in the past year than I did before I started the drawings. Oh. I have some osmosis of the time because, of course, I'm also a time traveler, so I live in the 60s for part of my life. And so though I wasn't deliberately analyzing art, I was getting some of the aesthetic from the television and the books I was reading and the movies I was watching or being forced to watch by this person right here.
I'm a bad dad.
More recently, I have been very influenced, like I mentioned, by Kelly Frias. I'll go through and look at the illustrations on some of my dad's articles when he goes through and reads fantasy and science fiction magazines and stuff. And I'm also making my way through the Wizard of Oz books, and I'm really enjoying looking at those illustrations. And there's quite a few in those novels, so there's a lot to see and basically analyzing the techniques and how they capture the scenes in art form. I'm probably going to be moving to a pen medium for the next book's illustrations. The originals were done in pencil, and the one you've got put up there was actually done also in charcoal to get much darker opacity for the space. But we find that it didn't quite show up as well on the page, so there will lose probably a little bit in shading. I'm probably going to move to pen and get a much starker image that way.
I mean, there's always the classic woodcuts. That couldn't be too hard, right? I wanted to show another image from there. Oh, well, first we have a question. And this is an interesting question because you being a time traveler, Zoe has the question of, do you do any work on the computer?
So I am I'm a very interesting teenager because I actually have a condition that prevents me from using the computer too much. I get some pain in the arms from typing and using the mouse. So other than what is required of me in modern day school, I mainly used anything I can do the old-fashioned way, I will. So when I'm writing my own stories, I hand write them. When I'm drawing, I almost exclusively do traditional media. And most of my entertainment comes from turning on the TV and changing the channel. And I like to read books in paper. So I am, and I almost barely, I only use the phone for calling people. So I am very,
Wait,
very
you can do
unusual.
that? I didn't know that mine. Huh.
She's very much an analog kid. We have several sets of encyclopedias in the house. We have an enormous library. So chances are if she needs to look anything up for school, we've got a reference section devoted to it. And if we don't, we order some. So yeah, we are proficient with 2020 tech, but we are also very conversant with 1960 tech.
I know how to work a record player, and how to work a tube radio.
And dial a phone.
I don't know. Have 8-tracks been invented yet? Seems to me they were.
So 8 tracks are going to be coming. 4 tracks are out, and they're used in radio stations in 1965. At some point, we'll need to tell them why we live in the past. But 8-track players are just a couple of years away, and what's really exciting is one of the fans of the Journey. I don't know if you've been to the Journey and seen the museum, but one of the fans of the Journey is going to be giving me a pristine 8-track player from 1968. So in a few years,
Nice.
I'll be able to showcase that on the museum.
Nice. We will be talking more about that in a moment, but first, let's get back to the illustrations in Qitra, because I still had another thing I wanted to talk about with that. You've had a lot of people in the line saying, carpal and cubital tunnel. I think that's what somebody suggested it might be, and someone else was wondering if there's the iPad with the pencil might be a thing, but that falls into the whole. Have you tried this yet? Of course you have. You live with this. So appreciate these suggestions, and I suspect that they are appreciated in the spirit in which they're intended. Let's put it that way.
We will take any and all suggestions, and people are welcome to email them to us. I will say that in the several years since this condition has arisen, and she's not the only one who suffers from it, we probably have tried almost everything.
Yeah, understood. So I wanted to bring up another illustration, and again, it's not one that you can see, but it's one of the characters around a table holding up a toast, and again, harkening back to that classic, simple line drawing kind of illustration that you had in the books. What I'm wondering is, Gideon, when you looked at the characters that she was illustrating, was there ever anything you're like, oh yeah, I didn't think about that, but yeah, that's exactly what they look like? Or were they the other way around? You're like, wait a minute, that is not, no, they're not that tall, or whatever. Anything like that? Any surprises?
Well, the original Peter was only 2 feet tall. I told her that was incorrect. No, actually, she was doing a lot of. Part of the reason she got the job was we would go out and she would just do character doodle. She enjoyed the book so much that she would just draw the characters. And I think that's what inspired me to suggest that she do illustrations in the first place. So she always had a very good grasp on the characters. And I remember when she did that picture in particular, I was very impressed with how she had caught the characters right off the bat. She just did a really good job of bringing these people to life.
I actually have something special here. So we've been talking about sometime in the future when there's like 5 books out and a lot of art for it, of putting together a Kitra Art Book, and so you'll get to see, because there's a lot of art that I do behind the scenes for concept and trying to grasp the characters and such. So this is actually one of the first illustrations that I ever did of Kitra and Pinky. I was at a hotel room visiting my grandmother in Maryland, and it was just one of those pads of paper, and I sat down and started drawing it. And so this is really one of the first.
Fantastic. That was on, and that's on the hotel stationery itself.
Yep. Back when she thought Pinky was more blobby rather than rubbery.
The question came up in chat. What are they drinking in that image?
So you'll have to read the book to find out, but I'll give you a little hint. It's coffee. Well, for most of them, it's coffee. There's one major exception, and you do not want to mix up the orders.
Oh yes, well I don't want to give it away either, but I do want to say that, and this is reflected in the image itself. You know, the one difference I see there from the classic sci-fi is that everybody isn't what was the name of it? Atlas Gym, whatever the muscle bodybuilder and vivacious bombshell character shapes and things like that. It was one of the things I believe we've talked about in the past was that this is intentionally inclusive and representative of several different things. Do you want to talk about that and why that was important?
People don't look like they came out of a stamp. People look different. Fareed, in particular, actually is modeled on a real person. He was one of my best friends in high school, and much cooler than me. So that's why I had to put him in my book. So now I have some control over his life. Qitra, you know, she's stocky. She's not hefty, but she's stocky and short. Marta is the beautiful one. She's also the big one, and those two don't have to be mutually exclusive. Peter is the closest you get to someone who is the Atlas that you're talking about. He's actually in some ways based on another friend of mine who used to get beat up all the time in middle school. And so he just started working out. And he just worked out ridiculous. It got to the point where he was the strongest guy in the school, and he was whiter than he was tall. And he was the nicest, calmest guy in the universe, but he was also a black belt. And everyone knew that if they ever picked on him again, they probably would die. So no one picked on him. So that's Peter. Peter is ironically not the hero of the story, although he certainly displays some heroic tendencies. And he's the conventional looking guy. But he's not the star. Qitra is the star. Pinky's the star. And that was absolutely deliberate. And I wasn't trying to make a statement. This is what the world should look like, because this is our world.
Excellent.
I would say that getting to draw so many different ethnicities and body types and personalities is really fun and rewarding. I think Pinky is still the funnest to draw because he can take any shape.
Right, even if she messes it up, how will you know?
But yeah, it's actually quite a rewarding experience to be able to capture so much diversity in my art. It's also a little challenge because the part of the reason that you'll see in older art everyone looks the same is because that's what the artist can draw. I've noticed a tendency where some artists will make women's faces look very masculine, like professional illustrators or comics artists. And that's because they're so used to drawing men. Like you'll find that the cast is mainly men in the comic. So when they have to draw the one woman, she's gonna look like a man. So just expanding, I take a lot of pride in the fact that I can expand the diversity and draw relatively different looking characters in a similar style.
To her point, a contemporary of Kelly Frias, who's a great artist named Ed Emschwiller, his wife, Carol Emschwiller, was generally his model. And she was a beautiful woman and also an excellent author. I'm sure some of her stories are going to end up in our rediscovery collections. But because of that, if you look at Ed Emschwiller's art, a lot of the women look like Carol Emschwiller. That's what he had.
I mean, didn't they talk about it with Michelangelo, like the different way he'd draw things? Occasionally when he would draw women, it was like, what was it? It would look like the men, but with softballs on their chest. And this has brought up a question in the chat. They're wondering what various ethnicities are represented in Qitra.
So Qitra takes place about 800 years from now, and as such, it's definitely a future setting, but not so far away that there aren't ethnicities that will be familiar. Of course, there's going to be a lot of intermixing of cultures by that point, and that you see that in Qitra, and you'll especially see that elaborated on as the series goes on. But the place where the Earth expands, there are three major polities, and the one that they are in, the Empire, is largely based on, I would call it the Levantine Eastern Mediterranean. So it's got a lot of Turkish influence, a lot of French influence, a Jewish influence, Islamic influence, but there's also, because I thought it was cool, just this big subset of Finnish influence. So you've got this interesting mix of stuff. So everyone is speaking French, and I make that clear early on. But there's actually not a lot of French heritage represented in the book. Most of the people are of Turkish extraction or Finnish extraction.
Okay.
Or they're an alien.
Or an alien.
And that's actually significant too. There aren't a lot of. This isn't like Star Trek. There are not a lot of aliens in the universe. So Pinky is actually a very special person, and he's interesting. He's not just a big blob filled with dad jokes, although that's a good first order approximation, at least for the first book.
I was going to say, how did you put me in the thing like that? That was amazing. Cool. I'm going to take down that image. And so you mentioned that in future Qitra books, and you were going to move on to the inks. Have you already started sketching or for things like that, Lorelei? I'm sure Gideon already has an outline or things like that set up, but.
Well, I'm ready to, but I have to wait until he finishes writing it. I am doing some of the preliminary reading and editing, though. I've read through. He divides it up into parts, so I've read part 1. And I'm waiting for him to finish part 2 so I can read that too, because I am quite actually enjoying this draft, and I'm very awed at how much he's improved, because
that used to be terrible.
I will say that Qitra went through several drafts before I was like, okay, this is good. But yeah, Sirena, the next book in the series, I've been enjoying reading the drafts, and I'm excited. So I cannot wait to start thumbnailing and looking at parts that I want to illustrate.
Sirena is, I just finished, I think, 33,000 words today. So it's a little more than half done, and it is on course to be done with the first draft by the end of January. And it's completely plotted out. Actually, the whole series is plotted out, but this book in particular is plotted out. What was great is yesterday, Janice read through it. Janice is my wife, and she came up to me with wide eyes and said, "I need more. Give me the rest. I need to know what happens." I said, "So do I."
Yeah.
I will say that though I haven't been working on illustrations for the actual book, I'm still working on concept art behind the scenes. So here's a little sneak peek of some illustrations of Marta that I've done to get used to working in inks.
Wow. Very cool.
Marta's fantastic. I love Marta. Marta is an interesting character and falls into no stereotypes. I had a friend of mine really appreciate her because she's an engineer. She's a biologist. She's a life systems engineer. So she's an intellectual. She gets her hands dirty. She's also the fashionable one. She likes makeup and she likes the clothes. And Kitra could not only not care less, but she actually physically does not understand these things. She would like to. She would love to know how to do that, but it's just not innate to her, and so she's always wearing tank tops and shorts.
Well, that a question came up in the thing, like, wait, why is she wearing heels in space?
Because she wants to, and that's deliberately discussed. Marta always dresses to kill.
Oh, and also someone pointed out that heels are easier in lower gravity. So.
That's true, although they have artificial gravity in Qitra, so she just wears them because she likes them.
Yeah, and that is the best reason to. A question also came up. When you're not drawing for your dad, what kind of... the question is, what do you do for fun? But I guess the other question I'm kind of wanting to tailor that is, what kind of drawing, or what do you enjoy drawing when you're not drawing the illustrations?
Well, if you want to see some of my other art, I actually do have an Instagram.
We will post that
I'm
again.
currently doing the Inktober challenge, which I've done for the past, I think, 4 years now. And I'm posting every 3 days. I'm drawing it every day and then posting a batch of 3. And I've done that for the past few years. I plan on posting more art for it in the future. I've been less active on it recently because of certain handicap issues. The other thing is I actually post a very quick doodle every day under the tag on Twitter and Facebook, #hardshippost. And it's another collaboration between me and my dad where we are documenting our life in quarantine, but as if we were stuck on an embassy on Alpha Centauri 4. And there's like over 200 now, and they're just very quick little like sentences and funny images. So if you need something to cheer up your day, highly recommend it.
Eggplant babies, that's all I'm going to say.
It gets pretty weird. I've got here a sketch that I did of a cover for a comic that I recently finished called The Rouge Rogue. At some point, I'm going to get the final pages scanned in and put online somewhere so you can all read that. I just need to get around to it. But if you look out on my Instagram or my commissions page, there will be information about it somewhere when it does get put up there. I also like to draw like fan art. I've gotten a lot more into drawing like anime and things like that lately. But I'm always just trying to improve my skills and doing work in several different mediums. So not just inks and pencils, but also acrylics and watercolor and gouache and all those. Pretty much if you name it, I could probably draw it with enough reference images.
Nice. Well, we have your commissions link up there on the screen so everyone can see it. Apparently, some people in chat have been looking at your Instagram, and the words "super cool" have come up and things like that. And Ponyo, I'm not cool enough to know what that means. The thing I wanted to talk about now is the fact. I mean, you're working for that imprint came out as part of the Galactic Journey Press, and there are other books in there. Are you planning on offering your services for the, other books by the press, or are you sticking with Qitra?
It hasn't been discussed as much. I think if I have the time and opportunity, I would love to expand my services. I will say that I am sort of particular in what I choose to draw. I've had a couple of opportunities in the past to do some illustrations for like short stories and things that I have chosen not to take because of either time constraints or I wasn't as much a fan of the story itself. So I think if I love the story and they need an artist and my style works for it, because though I think I am a good artist and I've got a large range, I also have a specific style that I can draw in. And so if all of those align, then I'd love to do more books under Journey Press. I know they are probably one of the best publishers that I could work under because their rates are incredibly fair. And I'm very lucky to be so close to the people who run it. But yeah, it's definitely been an amazing opportunity to become a published artist at such a young age. And I'm very gratified to know that my hard work is paying off.
It all depends on Journey Press's lineup. Some books make sense to have illustrations, some don't. So for instance, next year we've got 4 titles being released. And with the exception of Sirena, none of them it really makes sense. Although at least one of Lorelei's illustrations is going to make it into my collection, Clear Voyages, coming out next December. But eventually we're going to come out with an anthology of new work. We're going to publish fresh novels, especially books that go into the YA domain. I can definitely see Lorelei contributing at least a frontispiece illustration, for instance. Covers we tend to go... covers are very specific animals, and you want to go to cover designers for that. And so we tend to go out. We know a couple of excellent cover designers. So I don't think we'd be tapping Lorelei for that until she had specific experience doing that. Right. But in terms of interior illos, I could definitely see other books where that's happening.
Speaking of collaboration, that's one of the questions that came up for the Rouge Rogue comic. Is that all your own, or are you collaborating with someone on that?
That one was entirely me. I have a bit of a history with comic books. I don't know if you want to hear the whole story right now, but
absolutely.
So
she's kind of a big deal.
Here, let me grab it. It's right over here. This I did when I was, I think, 8 or 9.
Oh, okay.
And this is Bluebird. It's a 2-page comic that I did when I was pretty young. And so at the time, my mom had, she was known as the Batgirl of San Diego because she asked some pretty heavy questions at some DC panels about female representation in comics. And so she became...
and she was dressed as Batgirl when she did it.
Yeah, and so she became sort of this icon for a little while in the comics circles. And because of that, I had just drawn this at summer camp because I felt like it. And she was able to introduce me to a lot of actual comic artists working for DC. So people like Todd Knock, Dustin Nguyen, and Scott Snyder. And Scott Snyder liked my comics so much that he ended up creating a Bluebird character in Batman Eternal inspired by my Bluebird.
Wow.
And I think that was the coolest thing that has ever happened to me.
And if you don't believe it, if you Google Scott Snyder Bluebird, and do an image search, you will see a picture of Scott Snyder holding up this comic saying, yes, this is where I got it.
Wow.
But yeah, I have a bit of a history with drawing comics. Rouge Rogue actually came about because around the same time I created the first Bluebird, I was trying to write Rogue because I wanted to do a cool, badass character. Excuse my French there.
It's okay. It's on Twitch. We can say anything we want.
I couldn't spell Rogue. I spelled it Rouge instead, and they're like, you got to spell it the other way around. I'm like, wait a minute. It's actually kind of cool. And then years later, I was like, what if I take this idea and expand upon it? So I came up with an entire world and magic laws within it and a whole plot. And I'd say the general plot is a rogue, like a thief in medieval era France, but magic has to steal the king's illegitimate son and kill it, but she can't. So now she's on the run with her werewolf best friend, trying to escape the king and also get the baby and its mother to safety.
Like you do,
so the first issue is drawn, and it's mostly set up, but at someday I'd love to turn it into a full series.
Wow. That sounds amazing, and man, what a cool story! Someone did find it on the web and has a link now in the chat. So that is amazing. Wow. So I know it's not going to be nearly as cool, but I'm going to talk to your dad now about some stuff.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. I wanted to talk about the other titles that we carry here at World Builders, at least from Galactic Journey Press. What's the story behind the publication or the republication of I Want the Stars?
So, and we'll talk about it in a little bit. I spend most of my time living 55 years in the past, and I review the science fiction of the time 55 years ago. And one of the books I came across last year was a book called I Want the Stars by a very young author named Tom Purdom. And I was struck by it. You know, today there's sort of this idea that science fiction before the year 2010 is Neanderthal, unwoke, uncool, unworthy of being read. And that's not universal. And there's a few that people will say, okay, this is all right, but everything else is crap. Never trust fiction over 30. And but there are some people who wrote some stuff that is absolutely timeless. And one of the things I loved about this book was in 1964, they had characters who were queer, and not in a bad way, and not even in a spotlit way. That's just, they were, which I do in Qitra as well. People are just queer and nothing is made of it. People were multiracial. There was a suggestion of polyamory. And what was really neat about the book was the book begins with, Earth is a utopia. We have fixed all our problems. What now? What do we do? What do we do with ourselves? And these people decide to find the answer out among the stars. And the book was so compelling and so timeless. I'm like, I would love to republish this. And as it turns out, Tom Purdom, not only is he still around, and he was a Hugo finalist not too long ago, but he's still writing for the big magazines. And he's a really nice guy. And so I contacted him. I said, hey, can I reprint this? And he's like, sure, let's do it. And that's how I Want the Stars ended up in the Journey Press lineup. And I love it. And I want people to read it and enjoy it. This particular volume is cool because it has a making of at the end of it. So you not only get to read the book, but you get to read how it came about and what it was like to write back then. So it's just a neat volume. And I know that we're going to be giving out book plates later. Lorelei has made custom art book plates for all of these books. So this is the one for I Want the Stars, and it is signed by the author.
Excellent.
And by the way, these are the ones for Rediscovery and Qitra.
I want to clarify, I did not do the art for the Rediscovery bookplate, but I have done the art for the rest of them, and I intend on doing custom art for any other bookplates that we do in the future.
Right.
Cool. Yeah, we already had one person say that premise of that book sounds really cool.
Buy it.
Yeah, the answer is,
and
well,
review
you're
it.
right, it is. And I must making sure they know. Remember, you can get these right now. You can get those book plates personalized, and we have a couple that have asked for it already, but we have more on the way, hopefully. And I mean, you can sign the book plates and send them to us, and we can send them along with the books anyway. But it's better if they're personalized. So
Right.
this is the right time.
Just tell Gray what you want us to write on it, and we will do our best to remember correctly.
Yes. And we have a couple that we'll do right now, which we'll do for Qitra in a moment. But and it's great that you had Tom sign those. That is an added bonus. Did he say anything about the illustration, the customized illustration?
He's the one who asked us what we wanted. He suggested this sort of spherical ship, and we actually looked and found a cool illustration from a 50s science fiction magazine that was kind of what he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And so Lorelei basically adapted that based on what she thought the ship would look like.
Awesome. And so you mentioned you're going through. Do you want to say more about Galactic Journey and how this is going? Lorelei, what's it like to be living in 55 years in the past? Especially during quarantine, it's got to be a little more intense than usual, I guess.
Well, I will say that though I used to love Wednesdays and Thursdays because those were the days when the television shows that we wanted to watch came on, now one of the shows in our lineup is often Shindig, a show where they show various bands playing live music and their dancers dancing to them. And it's a new form of torture that I think the Russians are actually implementing right now.
I see.
If I hear the 12-bar blues played one more time, I might throw our TV out the window, all 30 pounds of it. But it's definitely a unique experience. In previous interviews, I think I've said, well, it's not really my thing. It's more my dad's hobby, and occasionally I'll participate in it. But now that we are at home a lot, it's like I've been immersed in a 1965 bubble. So when I turn on the radio, I'll listen to 1965 radio. All of the TV and movies that we watch are almost exclusively from the time.
Your wardrobe.
Yeah, my wardrobe. We just got a whole bunch of vintage clothing. This is a period shirt from the time.
RustyZipper.com. I can't recommend them enough. and they did not pay me to say that. I just love them.
Yeah, they are amazing, and the guy who runs it is super nice. And so I would say that, I'd say the weirdest thing about living in the time is when it overlaps with my history books, because I'll be reading in my history books about like LBJ and the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Movement and Kennedy getting assassinated, and I'm like, that just happened last week. It's
Wow.
I have a very interesting perspective on a lot of things because of the fact that I live in two time periods, and it definitely has changed my outlook on life quite a bit.
Every once in a while we'll get a comment saying, what you said doesn't ring true. It seems somewhat anachronistic. Are you sure you know the time? And it's like, yes, believe me, we know what it's like to live in 1965.
It's a fascinating. I don't know if I want to use the word like experiment. I wouldn't even say thought experiment because it's not a thought; it's the reality there. And I do think it's very interesting that you're finding a different perspective from each one. Especially, I mean, have you found that your contemporary knowledge and understanding of social dynamics and things like that puts things into a different light? Like, obviously Gideon would be the coolest dad from 1965 because of, you're not going to have
I'm no Gomez Adams.
You're not, well, okay, almost close, but you're not going to have exactly the same type of toxic masculinity that you would normally, that tends to be around in that. And I say that as someone who had parents who did grow up at that time and grandparents who did, and I saw a lot of that. I saw a lot of what they may have not gotten past. Or have you found that there's places within the time period that simply do fit within more what's the word, well-rounded values? I'm not sure I phrased that question right. I guess I'm trying to say is...
I understand what you're saying. The question is, can cool people who would fit right at home in 2020 exist in 1965?
Thank you. It's almost like you've heard this question before.
The answer is absolutely and obviously, because it's not like civil rights and feminism all got hatched out of a bottle in 1965 by a bunch of kids who were in their 20s in 1965. That's not how it happened. People have been fighting for progress since people have been definably human. So there were we may be on the end of the bell curve compared to the mainstream of society, but we absolutely existed. At one point, we went and tried to see who our avatars would be in 1965. People who've been born in the late teens, but would still be the hip, cool people who were fighting for rights. Pete Seeger is a great example. He was born in 1919, same as my alter ego. And he not only is in tune with the 1960s pop culture, he wrote half the music for it. Right. So absolutely, woke is not the sole province of people living in 2020. And I think it does a disservice to all the people who fought so hard to get us to this point in history. That's the thing. Some people will go, 1965, that seems like a nicer, simpler time. And I suppose for some people it was, and certainly you didn't have kind of the onslaught of social media and technology. But at the same time, it was a lot worse for a lot more people. And everybody was poor. I like to say 1965 is our time, just crappier. But I will say this, 1965 is neither better nor worse than 2020 on the whole. It just happens to be home.
I mean,
I will say that he has asked me a few times if when we're listening to like the Animals or the Rolling Stones, he's like, would I really like this music? And I'm like, yes, Dad, you would. You would have even at the time, even though you're in your 40s.
Wow, that old.
No, I'm 39.
Oh yeah, like Jack Benny.
Like Jack Benny.
Right, of course. Well, speaking of misconceptions about that, I mean, I think I can't remember if you said it or if I said it, but the third book, the anthology that you edited, Rediscovery, I think I termed it as it's science fiction by women. I think it's 1938 to 1965, and none of them are Ursula.
1958.
1958, and none of them are Ursula K. Le Guin, which is kind of when people say, well, yes, of course we had women writers there, and they always bring up like the specific few, and you're like, no, there's a lot more and a lot more fiction there. And in particular, our social media manager was reading it and said you wrote the intro to Lift a Ship, and wanted specifically about your thoughts about that piece.
So if you ask someone, ask people to name classic science fiction writers, women science fiction writers, if they know that there were any, and there were dozens, generally Ursula K. Le Guin is at the top of their tongue, which is why she's not in this collection. Not that she's bad.
Oh, yeah.
She was great, and she was great from the very beginning. Her first story in 1962, April in Paris, is one of my favorites. But she came into a field that was already rich with women authors. And one of them was Kit Reed. And Kit Reed was interesting in that she started as a journalist in the 50s. She got published from the slush pile in fantasy and science fiction, which is no mean feat. And she, of all the people that I researched, was one of the ones who really didn't encounter a lot of sexism or chauvinism keeping her as a barrier from being published. She was lucky in that regard. Kit Reed also happened to be one of the one author on that list who was still alive and who I'd actually gotten to be friends with. So to Lift a Ship was very personal for me, not only because it's a great story, but I'd actually gotten to talk to her and get her thoughts on it, which I put into the introduction and the story. So it's a very strong connection across time. The next volume of the book, which will come out in March 2022, is going to cover 1953 to 1957. We're already starting to put together story lists for that. Obviously, the people who wrote those are gone. I don't think any of them are still going to be around, but their kids are around, and I'm already starting to assemble interviews and get some interesting background information for the introductions.
Lorelei, did you have any particular favorite stories from that collection?
So I will be honest, the only two that I've read are the Putnam Tradition, which is the one that I actually wrote the introduction for, and the last one in the story is the testing one.
Unwillingly to Earth. Unwillingly to School.
Unwillingly to School. And I just actually simply haven't gotten around to reading the rest of them.
But you like that one.
But I did. I really did like Unwillingly to School, and a good part of it resonated with me. Mm-hmm. And it was just really cool to see such an... it's from the perspective of a young woman, and it was interesting to see how the author incorporated how she has trouble writing. And it's clear that she's an intelligent woman who just has an impediment in her writing. And it's just a fascinating read, and I just love how the author did it. I also enjoyed Putnam Tradition, and it's grown on me over time. I was not as much of a fan on it at the time, but that I did the introduction. But I will say that upon relooking at it, it has definitely grown on me. It's got a level of nuance that I didn't get the first time through.
Okay, I'm curious. Like, if you weren't a fan of it, but you wrote the introduction, was that under duress or?
Both of her arms were twisted behind her
Yes.
back. She had to do it all with voice recognition software. By the way, Janice noticed, she's looking at the chat. She said someone talked about that there wasn't a pandemic in 1965. I have talked about why we chose 55 years and how there's this resonance between the times. It was funny. I did the Journey. So every 2 weeks we do a broadcast from our house called The Journey Show. And it's done as if we are living in the past with a complete sort of Walter Cronkite news wrap up at the beginning. And the last show took place on October 10th. And I talked about how the president is in the hospital to have his gallbladder removed. He's also had a kidney stone from his right kidney removed. He's still got one lodged in his left kidney. And it is so refreshing to have a president who is forthcoming about his medical situation. A lot of people laughed at that.
I caught
but
that
there's
one.
all these interesting parallels between back then and now. And while we did not have a pandemic per se back then, although we were certainly still fighting polio, we did have something that was causing the death of several Americans every single day, and we were getting news updates on it every single night, and it was traumatizing the United States. And that, of course, was our involvement in Vietnam, which went on for several years and ultimately destroyed the president, despite, in LBJ's case, some landmark, amazing progressive things that he did. So we don't have a pandemic, but we do have a reason to dodge the authority and try to keep our lives intact, because we could be sent somewhere and killed.
That's a very good point. And people tell you, yeah, that is true. Well, should we assign a few book plates?
Yeah.
We've got a few requests here. And actually,
are we signing them here on the air? I can't imagine anything more dull than them watching me try to write.
The thing is, if the people see it on the air, they will be like, "Ooh, that's where it happened."
All right.
I like to do this real quick, and they are definitely wanting both signed. So, although actually, one of them would actually be, I guess, it'd be technically a remark because it's for one of the Tom Purdom for the Tom Purdom book. Oh yes, and I suspect that might be Janice. The next Journey show is going to feature another aspect of Lorelai's art, music. And I can tell you, so I got to I got to know Gideon in a previous broadcast here, and I started watching the Journey show, and it has now become one of my favorite parts of the weekend. I especially enjoyed the last two. The monster movie one. I should tell you that my partner and I are going through all of the Godzilla movies, starting with the first one, which was I think in 1958.
54.
54. Yes. And made the mistake of watching King Kong versus Godzilla.
It's not a mistake.
That's not a mistake.
Yeah, there were some things in there that we were not happy with. but anyway,
I just want to say I know people think that King Kong won because you see King Kong walking into the ocean at the end. He didn't. That's his corpse. Godzilla is wearing him as a hat.
Ah, gotcha. So I can tell you it's really, and the last one was about this new thing called Japanese animation that is becoming big, and we think it might actually go places. It was fascinating. So I can definitely highly recommend that. I'm looking forward to seeing the one with your music, Lorelai. So that's going to be fantastic. So the one for it's actually going to be a remark from Tom Purdom, but it's for Cobain, Cobain.
Okay.
And then the next
what
one.
What would he like?
There was nothing more other than saying to Cobain. So if you want to, I think that's all we need actually. I don't like to. They aren't in chat anymore.
No,
so
it's all right. So he's gonna get my 2 and Tom Purdom's signature.
That's it. That's all we need.
And if anyone wants it to be neatly written, you are talking to the wrong person.
Cool. And then we have one request for Qitra that we do have in here. And that will be both of you signing if possible. And that would be to Harvest. Harvest. Not sure if that's supposed to be a verb or a noun.
Did you spell the name again?
Harvest.
Har.
Like harvest, like crops.
Harvest. Yep. Yay. Thank you.
I also often, if it's personalized, I do like mini doodles. And
Nice.
so I know there's already a picture, but if anybody wants a mini doodle on their book plate, I would be happy to include that.
Cool. Well, we are reaching the end of the hour, so we will have to probably send you the rest of the things as they come in. And yeah, so we've mentioned that we have the Lorelai's commissions up there, and we put the Instagram in the chat. Gideon, do you want to tell us about how people can find out more about what is your Twitter stream and things like that for your news updates from 1965?
The best place to go, the major clearinghouse is Galactic Journey, all one word, galacticjourney.org. If you go there, you'll see our Twitter feed on the right side of the page. That's basically our news feed with it gets updated every day, several times with the news of the day. There's also a link to the latest Journey show. There's a link to Journey Press where you can buy our books. So there's links to past episodes of the Journey shows. All of them are archived for you to watch. So everything you could possibly want, you can get there from galacticjourney.org. The only thing that isn't there is I don't think there's a direct link to Lorelei's commissions, which I'll need to make sure there is. But in chat, you put a direct link to there.
Yes. And speaking of it, the chat wants to say thank you, echoing me. Thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon. I really appreciate it, and we love having you here. You're both always welcome to come on to World Builders and be a part. Actually, I guess we could talk a little bit. Gideon, can we talk about what we're going to do during the end of year fundraiser?
Oh, right. Yes, please. Tell them what's going to happen.
So, and I'm hoping we might be able to get Lorelei. I'm going to spring this on you live and in person here. So your dad and I were talking. There's this wonderful. It's like over 20 years old right now when you're living, called Heifer International, and they are a charity that is working to fight systemic oppression in various ways. As a matter of fact, in 1965, they just sent their millionth little chick to farmers in the Soviet Union who are under having a hard time through things. And they are helping with desegregating the farming communities and farming processes in Mississippi. So we at World Builders really believe in this organization. We believe it's here to stay for the long haul. And so we are going to be doing an old school telethon to help raise funds in early December. So we'll have more information as we go, but Gideon, we're looking forward to having you host on that, and we're putting together some various performers and getting our phone banks ready and all that fun stuff. So I'm not sure if Jerry Lewis is going to make it.
We'll do it just like NPR. You can't get this kind of quality programming anywhere else. Wouldn't you like to listen to this next program? Well, we're not going to let you hear it unless we can make our deadline $2,000 by the end of the hour.
I believe I heard about this before. We'd actually discussed breaking up some of the talking with me performing a couple live songs. And so I'd love to come back if you guys would have me.
Excellent.
We can get the backtracks for it. I don't know if you know this, but Tom Lear, the brilliant satirist.
You and I was actually just thinking that. I think in particular, I'm not sure if he's actually written it yet, but the I Got It From Agnes seems somewhat appropriate.
Oh, that's a classic from the 50s. So I have something of a voice. So I could definitely regale us with some Tom Lear tunes in the interstitials.
There we go. All right.
I'll be Jerry Lewis in between. So.
Well, and we're actually having lots of we had this when you were on, people said bring him back, and now everybody's saying yes, please bring Lorelei back. So thank you both for your time. I really appreciate it, and we will be in touch both with further bookplate things and also talking with you in the future. So.
Fantastic. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, this was a blast.
And we always end our broadcast at World Builders with a special magic word to make sure that we are going away. So here we go. Vivamoose. And the chat is saying Viva la Moose. Thanks a lot.